Hey everyone, Habu here with Happy Strong You, doing a live. I wanted to do a live on my fan page because I want to share across my free group and my paid VIP group across the board, and any other page I might share it on. But I want to share something that's not being acknowledged or maybe applied as far as helping to make your body stronger and helping you to be able to work through soreness, tightness, and rehab and so forth. But I did write this down on a board. It was funny because I was trying to figure out how to write it backwards. You know, in jiu-jitsu, when you try to look things upside down backwards, it becomes crazy. But I wrote this backwards, and it took me a while to try to write this thing backwards so that way it can show properly on my phone. But I stole this from a colleague of mine named Brad Thorpe, owner of Isometrics. So I'm going to credit you on this. But if you read this, you think about it, a lot of people are not, there's a lot of movement going on, movement-based, but there's not much focus on a certain strength. Key thing, if you want to reduce pain, reduce muscle and joint pain, you got to build your isometric strength. Okay, so if we want to reduce muscle and joint pain, you got to build your isometric strength. And I'll talk more about what that means. And then also, I wrote down force equals no motion. So in essence, I'm saying the less motion you have, the more force production you can have on your muscle tension. So the more force production you can have with your muscle contraction. In the other spectrum, let me say that again before might miss not my point, but the less motion you have, the more force production you can have within the muscle. Okay, so that's how we're going to start increasing muscle strength. And then the other end of the spectrum is the more motion you have, the less force production that you're not able to produce. So the less force you're able to produce. So let me repeat that. Less motion equals you're able to increase force production, and then in other spectrum would be more motion, then you're not able to, you're having to allow less force production that's being allowed on there. But I wanted to talk about isometrics. If you're watching live, hashtag live, that way I know who's watching, who may be benefiting. If you're watching replay, hashtag replay, or just whichever. But I wanted to show you there's a lot of, especially in jiu-jitsu, issues with hips, back, core, knee, okay? And there's other issues too, but those are the most common ones because that's the most being used within the sport. So I'm just going to cover a couple things on the hip. One of the concepts that you have to think about, anytime I'm going to use my arm as a example. So anytime we fully, so let's say this is like my neutral position, okay? If I'm standing here, my neutral position for my arm, okay? So if I fully internally rotate, okay, that's going to be it could be like the most extreme position, like shortened position for my rotator cuff, okay? And if I go back to neutral, okay, neutral, and then if I try to externally rotate, okay, down here, that is my fully lengthened position of my rotator cuff shoulder muscle, okay? So what I'm getting to is there's gonna be a point where when I'm treating people, we're gonna do positional tests and so forth, or positional isometrics, but when I'm treating people, there are certain positions that they could be just, their muscles cannot contract, and we cannot get a flicker of contraction. And so, like for instance, they might be okay here, and then as soon as I slightly rotate, they're not able to if I do a test here, holding for whatever reason, I'm pushing a certain way, they're not able to hold that position rock solid. Anytime it's unstable, it moves a little bit versus being solid in that motion. And so that's what I find is any weak points, and it goes back into jiu-jitsu. Anytime you have like your most extended lengthened position in an arm bar versus your most shortened position in, you know, trying to protect your arm from being arm bar, that's like your weakest point. And so we have to find ways to get those stronger and so forth. For instance, in a hip position, anytime we get in let me stand a little bit, you might not see my head, but that's okay. But this is like a neutral position, okay? And as we get into like the deadlift motion, but I'm gonna slightly bend my knee, but anytime I start to bend over, that starts to lengthen. And that motion can shut off some people's muscle, meaning they're not able to control the contraction of controlling that lowering movement. And so I have to find ways to regain the contraction and force production of their glute muscle. And so there are certain positions that I find that they're able to try to get into to where they're able to try to reclaim and try to refine that force production, that contraction, because you'll tend to lose it when you get in a certain position, especially when you're starting to get into like this inverted position, that lengthening position in the hips, the triangle, because that starts to be extreme for some people. And so I have to work to build those positional strength within those positions. Again, those starts to be an extreme position because you're no longer in that neutral strong position. Okay, let me give you an example. Just an example, a quick example. What's up, Steven? Nice to have you live. For instance, like I have this Velcro. Okay, the Velcro represents your hamstring or let's say a bicep. Okay, if I have this represents like the most lengthened position. Okay, extreme position on this end. Okay, so there's not much grab, so that's kind of where the limb, that extreme position, will start to be at its weakest. And so I can easily, there's going to be not much grab as far as, I can easily pull that off. Okay, versus if I start to, shorten, getting closer, that, it starts to grab more and so forth, and it starts to become stronger. And so just kind of give you examples. So what I try to do is, for that particular person, is finding what would be close to being neutral and then start working closer towards those extreme shortening and extreme lengthening ranges of motion, so they can start getting stronger in those positions, because there's going to be gaps, deficits within your ranges of motion, especially, if I do a leg curl, I can probably get like, some good tension in the beginning, and then I cannot grab a hold of my tension of the hamstring anymore, at a certain range or something like that. So something to kind of be mindful of while you're doing that, okay? All right, so you can have a box or something like that. I use a lot of stuff with this Oakwood Therapy wedge bolster, because I do a lot of core stuff on here, leg stuff. If you want to put a towel on here or even a board on here, because I do some core stuff on here, because it helps get you in a proper position where you're not straining too much joints or back or so forth. But you can use a foul box, but I'm going to use this right here to add an example. If you can see this, I do some bunch of stuff on this. But speaking of different positions, you're going to have to find certain positions that you're able to feel and create tension in the hamstring. I've had hip issues because I was smashed in a triangle, and so I had to deal with learning how to correct that and strengthen that and so forth. All right, so one of the things that I'm going to scoot back this way, that way you can kind of see. Think about the place of application. It kind of goes back into, you know, if I'm way out here, the longer the lever, the more stress that you, or load that you can put on that pivot point or that elbow joint, okay? Just as an example. So if I want to put maybe less stress off of that knee and then maybe more focus on the muscle that I'm working, you might think about sliding it closer towards that lever a little bit. That way I can focus maybe less on the knee, because there might be some knee issue. I'm just using as my arm as a example. But the further away I can, you know, it's going to be a quicker arm bar, you know, if I'm out in the wrist area and so forth. But if I'm here, I'm going to be stronger, which I can use the muscle a lot more and create more tension. So something to kind of deal with as far as when you're trying to rehab yourself, self-recovery and so forth, is I play around with different positions of where this block is going to be behind my calf or my ankle, because sometimes I may start here and then I might start working my way out so I can start to increase load and tension in here when I feel stronger to do that, if that makes any sense. If you have any questions, let me know, chime in. All right, so you can lay flat while you're doing this. What I'm going to do some isometrics. Isometric is where you're just going to try to create tension, build up in a static position. There's two ways that I do isometrics with my clients. One, where they're just lightly pressing in to make sure they're just fully focused on the muscle they're using. If you press too much, you're going to compensate and try to use other muscles that you should, you know, no need to do. And then the other one is a lot of times people aren't able to push down. They're not able to contract to create that, even a flicker. And so I have to ask for them to hold. It's a different experience. I might bring their leg up a little bit or a little bit down, depending on where they're able to get a little bit of hold. But I would have them hold that position, and then I would lightly pull up, and then I would tell them just try to maintain and hold. It's a different experience of trying to recreate that tension, that strength, isometric strength, versus if the individual is pressing down themselves. There's two different ways on that, okay? If you're laying flat, it may make it harder for some people. Let me see if I can angle it this way. So again, you can adjust. You might start the pad underneath, back behind the calf, knee area a little bit, but I would just keep the other leg bent, and then you're just going to lightly press down for, see how my butt kind of comes up a little bit, but we don't want to come up too much, just enough where you're able to see if you can try to, as far as recreate some tension. If you feel like you're not able to create tension in that glute muscle, and you feel it more in your hamstring, you probably need to come up a little bit, okay? In this position and push. You might have to angle back this way and then push down a little bit, okay? Because that gives you a little bit leverage, and then a little bit of an angle to anchor down a little bit to get that squeeze in that glute right there, okay? And then try to lightly push down. And again, if you want to play around, you might have to lean, scoot back a little bit, and then push down right here. If this hurts your shoulder, maybe prop up like 2-3 different pillows up there, and then push down, okay? So I would do that, hold that for 3 seconds, about 3 seconds. Light pressure, you don't have to force it too hard, just enough where you're able to try to create controlled tension, okay? 3 seconds for 3 reps is good enough, maybe 2 to 3 times a week to start out of the week. And then if you want to feel like you need to kind of do it almost every day, you can do that. But this is just a supplement with your strength training regimen that you're doing, recovery exercise, okay? So that's one you can do. The second one we can do is you can do it up against a file box, but without, you can use the shoes, okay? So if I want to work this hamstring,
I use a pillow, that way I'm not arching my back. So just work on a pillow, and then use the other shoe to block. This is gonna work the hamstring. This is part of your glutes. And then it's almost like I'm doing this hamstring curl for the isometrics, okay? Now remember, the further away, it may be a little bit easier, so you gotta find that mid-range to start to find that contraction, that tension, that right amount of tension. So this might be too much for me. I might have to back off and come away a little bit of that hip flexion. Remember, the more short it is, it starts to bind up and we start to have some weakness. So you want to find that mid-range that works for you. And then you want to think about tightening back here up and using the other foot to block, okay, for that motion, okay? And then recreate. And make sure the other foot, you don't have any knee issues with the other foot and toes. You might, that's one way to do it, okay? Self, or sometimes I have this block right here and I use the other foot to block, and then I pull away. And this is like, I like using this because it gives me the right angle to pull into. I'm not having to use my other knee to reinforce. Not as much, but I'm using this to do a hamstring curl and doing some isometric. But 3 for 3 repetitions, 3 seconds. Do that for about 2 to 3 times out of the week. Those are just 2 quick hip exercises. If you have any questions, let me know. I will show other recovery exercises. I just wanted to do it on this fan page so that way I can share with my other groups that I have. If you need more coaching on more specific customized recovery and or strength exercises, let me know. You can DM me and then I can customize something from you. All right, I think that should be it. If you have any questions, let me know. All right, thank you, Steven. Street Blast you out.